lovely people, Kitten here. Welcome to the first of a new series, going right back to the basics, starting you off. It's a new year, new hobby, we've all got new things to learn. We're starting our knitting journey right back, going to that ground root level. And today I'm going to take a look at all the various different yarns, thicknesses, talk about what they're made of, try and get you a bit of background information to actually what you're using. Let's have a look. Little bit of background information for you before we start. Yarn is weighed in balls of, they normally come in 100 or 50 gram balls, occasionally you get 25. That's the weight of the yarn. Unfortunately, yarn weight is also how thick the yarn is. So you might find somebody describe a yarn as a chunky weight. That's just the way it is. Now, it comes in different thicknesses, we know that. I'll show you all sorts of things. Whoever laid it out in the first place, I've got no historical background for this, but I suspect it was in the Victorian era, because this is when a lot of this stuff happened, when everything was put into the machines. The Great Revolution, the Industrial Revolution. The yarn plys are, it's absolutely phenomenal. It's so good. You don't, a ply is a single thread of thickness for the yarn. You'll get 1 and 2 ply yarns still used in factories for knitting these really fine jumpers. You used to get 3 ply. Occasionally you find it for baby yarns and also for home knitting machines. It's not readily available. 4 ply is getting very scarce these days. It's 4 single strands twisted together, most commonly used for socks, babies. You can only get it in baby pastel colours now. You can't get it in the bright colours, the various colours. Double knitting is 2 strands of 4 ply together. That's why it's called double knitting. It's double, so it's 8. Before there was double knitting, people used to use double strands to get the 8 ply. It's called double knitting. And there's no difference. This works all the way. You can mix and match all the different ply numbers to get where you want to go. So we've got 4 ply double knitting. 2 strands of double knitting is chunky. It's a 16 ply. 2 strands of chunky is super chunky. Once you get past super chunky into the mega, it gets a bit vague because it's slightly different. But your first basic principles are set out like that. The odd ball sitting in the middle is an Aran weight. An Aran weight sits in between your double knitting and your chunky. It's a strand of 4 ply and a strand of double knitting. It's a 12 ply, sits in the middle. It's an animal all of its own. It's come, obviously, its roots are in the Aran knitting. It's come from that. It's hard to work an Aran pattern on a chunky weight because it just ends up too big. It just ends up massive. So that's the weird little animal that sits. You can make an Aran weight with a 4 ply, but you can't get 4 ply and a double knitting. But everything else bundles up, double up, double up. You can use 2 strands to get chunky. You can use 2 strands and a chunky to get your super chunky. You can use 4 strands of double to get your, I've done it all. 4 strands, 5 strands, see how. As long as you mix the right material content, then that's how you work your plys. We'll talk with what the yarn's made of. I'll get all the yarns out and show you. That's how plys work. Let's give you a practical show of it, shall we? I've had a little bit of a route around what I've got knocking about. I can't find my scrap of 4-ply. I only had a tiny little scrap. It's not something I use. I can't find it anywhere. But basically, it's that kind of thinness. Okay, it's that. So what you're most commonly going to be using is your double knitting, which is this thickness. If you put this together, you will see you get your double thickness. That's got an extra twist in it. The twist, it's called the twist or the spin of the yarn, is this thing that makes it go round. It's what keeps it together. If it's a very loose twist, it can be prone to splitting when you knit it, but you get a lot more of that with the thicker yarns because they spin it more loosely to keep the bulk up. It's all your double knitting. Now, 2 strands of double knitting. This is your chunky. Make a chunky weight. 2 strands of double knitting. Make a chunky weight. And there's no magic, there's no trick to it. You quite often find that double knitting is 2 strands of yarn these days. It's not always 4. It's just how the machines work. You can pull it apart and have a look. A single ply would be fine. Like that would be a single fine. Very, very fine. You can mix different colours to get variegated, to get your chunky. After your chunky comes your super chunky. Now, if you have a look, you can see the difference between how tightly that's spun and then that's not as tight, and then that's even looser. When you get to your mega chunkies, the stuff that people are using for arm knitting, they're very, very loose. They're very prone to falling to pieces. They don't last long. It's not a good investment. It just disintegrates because there's no twist. The twist, the spin on them, is what keeps them the strength. It's what gives the fibres their strength. But you could double that up to make yourself a super chunky if that's what you wanted. Once you start, I think this is even looser. Once you start splitting this up, I always say to people, don't sew up with this because it's too thick and too bulky. You need to split it when you tuck your tail ends in, and you can see how fragile it is. You don't get that with this. It's much stronger, much tighter. You've also got your fancy yarns. Let's just chuck all those back in the box. Now, when the thickness of yarn is worked out, it's not, I've shown you those thicknesses, but it's not just, oh, it's this thickness, it's got to be that measurement. It's about the space that the yarn takes up on the needle. So you would look at this and you would think, well, that's fairly thin. That's got to be, a 4-ply or a double. It's not. All this hair takes up extra space. You would be working that as a chunky. I know, crazy, isn't it? This, there you go. That's another chunky. Although this bit in itself is really, really fine, all this hair and fluff takes up extra space. You don't get a lot. Fancy yarns seem to be out of favour at the moment. The tinsels, these are tinsel. Kendal tinsel is the most common. It's what's called an eyelash. It's got a thing like that and your fibres hanging down. You would look at that and think, oh, I don't know, double knitting? It's a chunky weight. I know, mad. All this fluff, this uneven texture takes up space and you have to bump your needle up an extra size to get use out of it. This one is a perfect example of what I was telling you about, the twist. This is not available anymore. It was the most gorgeous yarn. It was Robin Mardi Gras, absolutely stunning. Pig to work with, absolute pig. You really had to have your wits about, because this fluffy, this beautiful bit was loosely spun around this piece, so you kept getting your needle point in between. See how loose that is on there? It's just something you have to be aware of. Constantly splitting, you really got to have your wits about you working with that. Chunky, gorgeous. Quick little word on, oh, it's a bit loud in our face there. Yarn composition. I always try to use the term yarn because it's like the old Pepsi Cola stuff. You know, a Coke. A Pepsi isn't a Coke. Wool. Yarn isn't always wool. Wool isn't yarn. So I always try to say yarn. The quality, modern acrylics are fantastic. I'm a huge supporter of modern acrylics. I'm a huge supporter in the right yarn for the right job. There are things that wool is not suitable for. I'm not going to get into the technicalities of the rights and wrongs of any. I can do that if you want me to. I have a very opinionated, because I know the inside of factory stuff. Acrylic will mix with acrylic if it's got nylon with it, polyamide, that will all mix together. Right across the brands, it's a myth you have to have the brand. No. Once you get experienced, you will notice that the cheaper yarns that you get in the shops like the Pound Shop or the Works, Home Bargains, the Range, stuff like that, hasn't got the squishiness in your hand. It's a bit stringy. It hasn't quite got that. That doesn't make a long-lasting project. It's just not nice. But that aside, stick to the good quality brands. There's loads of choice out there. Huge supporter of James Brett, does a wonderful job. Wendy. Nothing wrong with Kendal. Serdar can be a bit, but all those big names, fine. Mix, all you mix together, not a problem. If something's made of wool or has a high content of wool, it behaves slightly differently to acrylic. It's not stable. Like acrylic isn't a fixed thing, it's set. Wool is not ever fixed. It's constantly pilling, rubbing against each other. Every time it rubs against each other, it's changing its composition. It's just what it is how you can knit and then felt, because it's never finished. You can felt. You can cut felt up. You can respin it. It's never a similar thing. Just hold on a second. If you're mixing weights to get the thickness you want, mix across similar items. Mix acrylic with acrylic. Don't put a high wool content in with acrylic, because you'll find the wool will shrink and it will distort. It might only be a tiny, but it will distort, it will change it. There's the dog's blanket here. If you're making something for the dog and you're using all your leftovers, it doesn't matter. You can bet your life I won't be able to find a spot now. This was made for my Henry when he was poorly. But you can see where she's used odd bits of wool in it. It's been washed and washed and washed over the years with all the dogs. It's shrunk, it's different. And the wool wears out quicker, so it's got big patches in it. I don't know if you can... I can't find a spot. I don't know if you can see. You can see how that is big and thick and even. And then if you look at... You see that bit is more gappy. One would have had a higher wool content, or the gappy one might have been the cheapy imports. It will behave differently. It's just the way. If it's a dog blanket, it really doesn't matter. If it's something for a kiddie, or it's something that's going to be worn and washed a lot, it's not a good idea. But apart from that, you can mix anything with anything, whatever the brand is. You can mix it. And they're very good, actually. The brands are very good at sticking to the rules. Double knitting is double knitting is double knitting. Very rarely, sometimes with the speciality yarns, and depending what you're doing, it will make a difference. But they're very good. Any chunky, any double knitting, two together to make a chunky, to match any other chunky, it will work. I know it sounds crazy, but they adhere to the rules pretty well. So, yeah, anything will work with anything. It'll tell you on the label. That's a good thing. Look at the label. You can get away with a low content wool. If it's a 10% wool, that'll mix. That'll be fine with an all acrylic. If it's a 50%, then that's not. 20% might, depends what it is and how it's going to get used, but definitely not higher. Definitely not. Any 100% wool, same. Any 100%. The small artisan spinners don't always conform to the same thickness simply because it's a hand process and they haven't got the control that a machine's got, unless they're spinning with a machine. And I don't mean a spinning wheel, I mean a spinning machine. They're different things. But yeah, that's your basics. Any questions, please ask. I hope to give you more freedom of choice when you go to get a pattern, or you dig an old pattern. We find a pattern in a charity shop. Oh, I like that, but I can't use it because that's yard's not available. It doesn't matter. We can find a modern alternative. We can switch and chop and change through all the brands. They're all interchangeable. So, if you're not signed up to our patterns, to get a free pattern every month, sign up for that. I haven't quite got all the list out for this year's patterns, but the next 2 are in work. So, lots of lovely, happy knitting. See you soon.